So this one is going to be a long one, so I do apologize in advance, but it's a very important one. So I want to start with something that would surprise many students or parents. I've worked with many students who understand far more maths than their grades actually suggest. In fact, some students are only a few marks away from the next grade boundary, despite knowing most of the content they need. What's the reason for this? They aren't always losing marks because they don't know the maths. They're losing marks because they don't know how to maximize marks in an exam. Okay? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, when parents see a disappointing exam result, the natural assumption is my child didn't know enough of the maths. Okay? Sometimes that is true. I'm not saying it's not. But most often, there's a second issue. And that issue is students, right? They don't have the proper exam skills. Because for the GCSE maths subject, the maths knowledge is one part of it, but the exam technique is another thing. Because it's also testing communication. This is what the test is testing you for: communication, decision making, time management, accuracy under pressure. Those are all skills that make up the GCSE maths exam, and fortunately, these are all skills that can be learnt. This is one of the most important distinctions in the entire course, I would say. Knowing maths and performing in an exam are not the same thing. At home, students can take time, they can ask questions, they can correct mistakes, they can look things up. In an exam, they must apply knowledge quickly, accurately, and under pressure as well. Those are two very, very different environments. And that's why exam technique matters so much. So, one thing I wish every parent understood is how GCSE maths papers are actually marked. So, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of that. Most people think the examiner is simply looking for the correct answer. Is it right or is it wrong? But in actuality, they're not. Examiners award for three main things. Okay? Method marks, working marks, and accuracy marks. And that means students can earn marks even when their final answer is wrong. And that creates a lot of opportunities to get marks, even if you don't know the final answer or how to get there. Okay? And this is something families never realize, or realize, too late maybe. A student can make a mistake right at the end of a question and still earn marks because of method marks, because the examiners reward the process. If the method is correct and the working is visible, marks can still be awarded. This is one of the reasons exam technique can have such a dramatic impact on grades. Sometimes we're not trying to gain new knowledge when we're working with kids or students. We're simply trying to stop marks from being thrown away. Okay? So sometimes, if I'm working with a student and we work on their exam technique, we do that before we learn topics, to ensure that when they learn the topic, they're able to fully communicate and get all of the marks available in the exam. So they're not throwing anything away, even though they know the content. Now, common mistake number one that a lot of students make is not showing working, right? This is probably one of the easiest problems to fix because many students do calculations in their heads, unfortunately. Or they scribble rough notes that doesn't make sense to anyone except them, then only write the final answer, right? Examiners cannot award thinking. They cannot get into your child's head. The problem is simple, right? This is a simple problem. They can only award marks that they see. So if you write out a method, they can see the method and they can award you according to that method. So no working often means no marks. Okay, because marks sometimes are dependent on each other, depending on the exam board, of course. But this is very important to be able to communicate your process so that you can get the method marks even if you can't get to the final answer. Now let's just put a scenario up. Imagine student A and student B. Okay, student A only writes down the answer he got, right? It's wrong. Let's say that answer is wrong. And so he gets 0 out of 3 marks because he didn't do a method and he didn't even, write down the correct answer. Now, let's look at student B. He clearly shows a method in how he got to his answer, but his answer is still wrong. Okay? Right? It's still wrong. He still earns 2 out of 3 marks because he was awarded for the method. And so, same, same thing, same question, but this student got 2 out of 3, this student got 0 out of 3, even though they both got the same wrong answer. Okay? And so this is the power of method marks. Okay? One student understood that they understood, one student didn't. And that is the difference. Now, common mistake number 2 is misreading the question. Parents are often shocked by how many marks are lost simply because students answer the wrong question, not because they don't know the method, right? Not because they don't understand the topic, but because they rush the question, they rush it. Under pressure, students often read what they expect to see rather than what's actually written in their exam, and that habit can be incredibly costly. So one thing to sort of slow the student down to ensure that they're reading things properly, what I would recommend is circle the command words. Things like calculate, things like estimate, solve, prove. These are command words that a student should get used to searching for and then circling them so that they can slow down in the exam. Okay. And when students slow down long enough to identify the instructions, mistakes normally dramatically reduce. Okay. And common mistake number 3 is avoidable errors. What do I mean by avoidable errors? I mean errors that have nothing to do with, lack of knowledge or anything. It's to do with silly small mistakes, such as negative signs, calculator errors. You've typed something into your calculator slightly wrong. Decimal placement. Copying mistakes. You've copied something from the top of the question and you brought it all the way down, and then you made a mistake there. Okay? These are habitual problems. Okay? They're not knowledge problems. And luckily, these are very fixable. In fact, reducing avoidable errors is often one of the quickest ways to improve your exam performance. As soon as you slow down and you avoid those, then, the world's your oyster. Now, again, a lot of these things, they intertwine together because a lot of it is about slowing down a little bit, right? And making sure you're not making silly mistakes because you know the knowledge, you just need to communicate that you know the knowledge. Okay, so I would recommend a 2-minute checking process, or however long it takes. This is just a rule of thumb, but make sure you do this at the end of the paper and not after you do the question. You can do a little bit of a check at the end of a question, but what I would say is, well, I'll talk about that in a few slides later. Let's just talk about this first. Just checking, right? Is not enough. You need to have a process, as we say for everything. Effective checking, right, takes into consideration all of these 4 components. Does the maths add up properly, right? Do the units make sense? Is this in the question requirement? Does it align? And then is the answer reasonable? And if all of those are checked, then good for you, you can move on. Now, this simple routine catches far more mistakes than random checking ever will. So if a student has made a mistake and then they just quickly glance over it, that's not really going to be helpful at all. Okay, so why most students don't check properly? The reason checking fails is because students look at the answer and immediately see what they expect to see. They immediately see what they've written down, and so, right, why check even further? But real checking means challenging the answer. Okay, that's important. Challenging the answer. Can I prove that this is right? Does it make sense? Have I actually answered the question? That's very different from simply reading it again and then going, yeah, yeah, looks good, looks good. Okay. Now, number 4, poor time management. This is another huge issue. You know, students get stuck on a difficult question. They spend 10 minutes trying to solve it. And while they're doing that, easier marks are sitting unanswered later in the paper. Every examiner sees this, right? And it costs students far more marks than they realize. So, as everything we have here, there's a system, the mark value rule. Okay, again, this is a rule of thumb, but it's something to be wary of. I teach this to students all the time. Time should roughly match the marks. A 2-mark question should not take 10 minutes. It should take about 2 to 3 minutes. If a student gets stuck, move on. Move on. But mark the question so that you can come back to it later. Because the goal of the exam is to collect as many marks as possible across the whole paper. And if you're going to stop yourself because you stumble on a question you can't answer, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, quite literally. Okay? Move on. There will be more time at the end if you've consistently applied this rule, looked at all the questions, and by the end of the exam, you would have answered every single question that your capability was able to get. Then you can spend more time on the questions that were a bit more difficult so that you can get those extra squeeze marks. Okay? Now, the exam technique framework. Okay, I love using frameworks. If we put it all together, look, the process is very simple. Read carefully, show working, manage your time, check your answers, maximize marks. And that's the framework. It's simple. And the more students rehearse that process, so when your child is, practicing past papers and doing things like that, it's important for them to use this process, because the more they use this process, the more automatic it becomes. And so when it comes to sitting a real exam, a real assessment, they will have this, it'll just come through. Okay? There won't be any hesitation. So, as I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this a lot of times, is that, confidence comes from preparation. Confidence isn't something students magically develop. When students know exactly what they're going to do, right, and when they're going to do it, when they open the paper, they already have a game plan, right? Their anxiety reduces. Everything becomes more clear because uncertainty has been reduced, and therefore the anxiety is going to be reduced. Preparation always creates confidence. The more prepared you are for something, the more confident you are going to be in that thing. Now, knowledge plus technique is equal to better results. Okay? Remember that equation we talked about, I think, in video 2? This is the real equation. Knowledge plus technique. Knowledge gets students part of the way and technique drives it home. Okay? Because this is the part that demonstrates the student knows what they're doing to the examiner so that they can be awarded for their knowledge. Okay? It's like yin and yang. And that's often the difference between the grade they could achieve and the grade they actually achieve. So technique is very, very important. Now, if there's one thing I'd like you to remember from this video, it's this. Your child may know more maths than their grades suggest, as I said at the beginning. The issue may not be entirely knowledge. It may be technique. And the good news is that technique is very, very teachable. Okay? I do this with students all of the time. This is one of the biggest things that takes grade 8 students to grade 9, grade 7 to grade 9, grade 7 to grade 8. Exam technique. So, The 4 habits I would encourage every student to practice are showing working, reading the questions carefully, manage their time, right, based on the mark value rule I showed before, and check effectively, as I said before as well. These are very small habits, but make sure your child or your student gets into the habit of using them so that it becomes automatic and natural. These have huge impact on their grades. Okay, so we've talked a lot about everything, about the theory, and I've given you a lot of documents to obviously fill in for your own child and your own reference. The next video, right, you're going to see how everything fits in together using a real actual student case study. Okay, you'll see exactly how the framework was applied, what was holding the student back, and how those changes led to a significant grade improvement of 3 grades, from grade 4 to grade 7. Because understanding the framework is one thing, but seeing it in real life is something entirely, and I hope it is going to benefit you so that you can then apply it to your child as well. Okay, thank you for your time as usual. I will see you in the other video.